Okay, that's a good point. Good morning. Good morning, Fountain Street Church. Happy Sunday. Thank you for choosing to be with us this morning. My name is the Reverend Greta Seidohl. I use she, her pronouns, and I have the honor of serving here as the assistant minister. Welcome again to Sunday, July 17th. How are we in the middle of July already? I'm so grateful to be here with Jill, but I'm really not sure how we got here. We are in the midst of our summer speaker series. During the summer months, we not only shift from our sanctuary into this chapel where it's a little cooler, thank you, and we also shift from having the ministers share every week to inviting various congregants and lay leaders from within the Fountain Street community to speak on subjects which they are passionate about. And so today we are joined by Jill Van Antwerp, speaking on teaching critical race theory, and we are grateful for her wisdom and her passion to share with us today. Another quick announcement about shifts in the summer is that we do not have young youth and child programming. However, our nursery is open and has games and puzzles and things for older age kids as well as just nursery age little ones. So if you need a body break, if you need to move or wiggle, please know that folks are welcome up there too, but your presence is also welcome here. My last kind of announcement I'll make now, particularly for those of us who are joining us virtually, is that the rain is supposed to hold off until 3 o'clock this afternoon. And so our picnic scheduled for 11:30 at Whalefield Park is still on. And we hope that folks will join us there, whether you've joined us in person, virtually, or not. We hope to see you there. So whoever you are, whomever you love, and wherever you are on this life's journey, please know that you are welcome here, that you are loved in your wholeness and the fullness of your being, and we thank you for choosing to share of yourself in community here with us today. As our invitation to worship, I will share a reflection from the Reverend Aisha Anzano, who is a dear colleague of mine. And this reflection was written particularly for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but it is relevant to our opening hymn. And so I invite you to hear these words as an invitation, as a meditation, and as a call to spirit and body to join in worship together. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a time when particular songs get sung. One of them is Lift Every Voice and Sing. It gets sung in school, in church, at various MLK Day celebrations over the course of Black History Month. It's a very, very powerful song, and it's sung without context. And at times, it's sung without a lot of intentionality. When you sing, lift every voice and sing, do you pay close attention to the words? It's easy on a Sunday morning to open the hymnal and sing along without necessarily processing what we're saying, what the words we're saying really mean. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Bitter the chastening rod felt in the days when hope unborn had died. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. This song deserves to be sung with attention. It is a song that starkly names the horrors and violence of racism in this country, and it is a song that should make us uncomfortable. Uncomfortable with the history that it calls upon, uncomfortable with the fact that the struggle for racial justice continues and has not come quite so far as it should have by now. How can anyone sing the words, treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, without deep, deep discomfort. So when we sing this song, will you join me in singing with intentionality? Will you join me in the deep discomfort that I will be feeling as I sing those words? Discomfort with the pain and the horror that those words refer back to, and discomfort with the fact that those words do not only refer to distant history, but also to what is happening now. Will you commit to sitting in your own discomfort? And then, will you tap into that discomfort and do something? Will you lift your voice and sing until earth and heaven ring with harmonies of liberty? No, really. Open your hymnals, turn to page 149, and lift every voice and sing until earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Join me in our gathering hymn.
Good morning. And I'd like to thank the Summer Series Committee for asking me to speak. It's a real honor always to take this pulpit. I've picked for the first reading an excerpt from Isabel Wilkerson's book, Cast. Caste is a book in which Wilkerson examines the caste system in India and the racial hierarchy in the United States and makes a comparison. But in one section in the book, she has entitled The R Word. She discusses what is racism. Social scientists often define racism as the combination of racial bias and systemic power, seeing racism, like sexism, as primarily the action of people or systems with personal or group power over another person or group with less power. As men have power over women, whites over people of color, the dominant over the subordinate. But over time, racism has often been reduced to a feeling, a character flaw, conflated with prejudice, connected to whether one is a good person or not. It has come to mean overt and declared hatred of a person or group because of the race ascribed to them, a perspective few would ever own up to. What does racist mean in an era when even extremists won't admit to it? What is the litmus test for racism? Who is racist in a society when someone can refuse to rent to people of color, arrest brown immigrants en masse, or display a Confederate flag, but not be certified as racist unless he or she confesses to it or is caught using derogatory signage or slurs? The fixation with smoking out individual racist or sexist can seem a losing battle in which we fool ourselves into thinking we are rooting out injustice by forcing an admission that A, is not likely to come, B, keeps the focus on single individuals rather than the system that created that individual, and C, gives cover for those who, by aiming at others, can present themselves as noble and bias-free for having pointed the finger first, all of which keeps the hierarchy intact.
I want to ask you to join me in the spirit of meditation, of prayer. In a moment, I will read a pastoral prayer number 2 by the Reverend Viola Abbott from The Promise and the Practice. But before that, I'm going to invite us to get in our bodies a little bit. When we hold difficult topics and our brains start to run, sometimes our hearts start to race, and the way that we think and that we feel about these hard topics shows up in the rest of our bodies. And so as we hope to hold these conversations as a community of faith, it's important that we pay attention to our bodies and how we are embodied in this conversation we have together. So whether you're at home or here in the chapel, I invite you to just wiggle your body, just so that you know where it is. You might have just come in here, maybe at the last second, and slid your way into a seat and just sat down and didn't think much about how you found your way into your seat. So find a pose that feels intentional for you, whatever that means. Perhaps both feet are firmly planted on the ground. Perhaps you wiggle back and forth so that your weight is evenly distributed on your seat. Perhaps instead of having arms clenched or fists gripped, you can relax them and let them fall open on your legs or on your lap. Then I invite you to soften your gaze. Close your eyes if you'd like, or just let them go a little out of focus. And then find your breath. Bring intentionality to your breath. It is what sustains you. It is the undercurrent that's ever with you. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. With every inhale, bring with it the fullness of intention and a posture of attention. And with every exhale, release that which holds you tight. Release the things which hold you back from being fully present in this space with us today. Breathe in. Breathe out. And you continue to breathe as I share this prayer from the Reverend Viola Abbott. Let us open our hearts, still our minds, and enter a time of prayer. Let us call forth and hold in our hearts the stories of all who have come before us, the memories of those who are with us today, the hope for tomorrow, and for those who will come after us. Let us be thankful for this opportunity for healing, forgiveness, and reconciliation, while knowing that we can never, should never, forget what has brought us here today. Let us be glad that voice has not only been given to those whose sorrow and pains were their companions in this faith, but that the stories told have been received with the goal of redemption and understanding. Let us call upon that light which shines in each of us to give us the strength to go forward into the future and do the work that is necessary and which does not end here today. Let us have the wisdom to lovingly have the conversations we need to have with each other, that we must have with each other in order to grow in faith, in radical love, and inclusion. Amen.
For our second reading, I've chosen a poem. This poem was written by Kwame Alexander, who's mostly known as a children's writer, and it has been in 2019 published in a most beautifully illustrated children's book, illustrated by Kader Nelson, and I highly recommend you find this book and read it to your children and grandchildren. He wrote this starting it in 2008 when he felt so good about where this country was going. And he aimed it at his daughter and other African-American children. It's titled, The Undefeated. This is for the unforgettable, the swift and sweet ones who hurdled history and opened a world of possible, the ones who survived America by any means necessary, and the ones who didn't. This is for the undeniable, the ones who scored with chains on one hand and faith on the other. This is for the unflappable, the sophisticated ones who box adversity and tackle vision, who shine their light for the world to see and don't stop till the break of dawn. This is for the unafraid, the audacious ones who carried the red, white, and weary blue on the battlefield to save an imperfect union. The righteous ones marching who sang, "We shall not be moved because Black lives matter." This is for the unspeakable. This is for the unspeakable. This is for the unspeakable. This is for the unlimited, the unstoppable ones, the dreamers, the doers who swim across the big sea of our imagination and show us the majestic shore of the promised land. The Wilma Rudolphs, the Muhammad Alis, the Althea Gibsons, the Jesse Owensons, the Jordans and the LeBrons, the Serenas and the Cheryls, the Reese Whitleys, and the undiscovered. This is for the unbelievable, the we real cool ones. This is for the unbending, the black as the night is beautiful ones. This is for the underdogs and the uncertain, the unspoken, but no longer untitled. This is for the undefeated. This is for you and you and you. This is for us.
This is for the undefeated. This is for the unimagined by us. That wasn't how I planned to introduce the offering today, but that is how I'm going to introduce the offering, because the offering is an act of faith that we engage in together, saying that our money, that our time, that our talents can do more together than we could dream alone, that are less easily defeated together than they are alone. So the offering is an opportunity to put your faith in action this morning, to support the ministries of this church and the good works of our community. I hope that you will give generously so that we might dream bigger together.
So my topic today is teaching CRT, teaching critical race theory. I'll use both of those terms. The topic is complicated, and I do not want to make it simple in what I have to say. I think the first question you might ask is, why me? Why would I be talking or even teaching this subject? I have taught at a university, which many will say is the proper venue for teaching critical race theory, but my area of expertise is English language arts. And I spent most of my 40-year career teaching English, excuse me, at the high school level. So specifically, my talk today will be about teaching the concepts of critical race theory at the high school level, or junior high, or any level K through 12. And in that case, I may actually be the right person to do it. In 2021, the National Center for Education Statistics indicated that in the last year for which they had the figures, which was 2017-18, 79% of U.S. public school teachers identified as non-Hispanic white, 79%. History and English teachers, and at times teachers of any subject at any grade level, might find themselves bringing up topics that may or may not be described as critical race theory, but which are certainly within the broad understanding of that term to the general public. And the statistics show that most of those teachers have not been in a position to experience firsthand the negative aspects of the racial divide in the USA. My experiences while teaching high school English did not come from a mindset that understands what it means to be a racial minority in America. But like most of my colleagues, when I led discussion, excuse me, on pieces of literature that touched on issues of race, I tried to be as sensitive and honest as I could. Almost all of the students that I taught in small-town Kent County also identified as non-Hispanic white. So we struggled together to understand what we were reading and to respect the issues that arose in the literature I chose in my English classes. Before I talk about those experiences, I'd like to present one definition of critical race theory. You can find dozens. For this one, I chose the writing of Dr. Sue E. Hutchins, PhD, a teacher of Africana at Bates College. She was a panelist for a webinar called Critical Race Theory, presented in 2021 by the Living Legacy Project. And she wrote in an article in UU World in spring 2022, the article was called, "What is Critical Race Theory?" She wrote, and I quote, "CRT is a sophisticated mode of legal analysis first developed in the 1970s and most definitely was not designed for elementary and secondary school students. CRT posits that race inflects all aspects of our society. As an often invisible element of our legal, social, and intellectual structures, race is taken for granted and thus goes unacknowledged." So how did a term for a theory used in legal studies at the university level become a term to describe the teaching of history, social studies, or literature lessons touching on diversity and social justice? In these charged political times, critical race theory has suddenly become a negative, used to describe material in any course or textbook in any school at any age level that makes any student feel uncomfortable about the history of race relations in the United States, especially if that discomfort arises because of a student's group identity. When I was studying to become a teacher, one of the books that I was assigned to read was called Teaching as a Subversive Activity. I took it to heart, go in my classroom, shut the door, and teach. I wasn't very subversive, But that book did inspire me to touch on important topics. One passage that inspired me was in a section where the authors, Neil Postman and Charles Weingartner, imagined a world where all of the current curriculum and all of the textbooks in every school were eliminated. With what would they be replaced? The authors suggested, and I quote, "Suppose that you decide to have the entire curriculum consist of questions. These questions would have to be worth seeking answers to, not only from your point of view, but more importantly, from the point of view of the students. In order to get still closer to reality, add the requirement that the questions must help the students to develop and internalize concepts that will help them to survive in the rapidly changing world of the present and the future," unquote. I took that challenge to heart. In the 80s and 90s, I taught courses to college-bound seniors to prepare them for the kind of work in reading, writing, and speaking that they would be required to have mastery over when they were at the college level. But I also felt there were attitudes that they should have mastery over. I wanted these students to walk onto college campuses with an understanding of the diversity in our world and with a sensitivity to the issues that arose among people of many backgrounds. For one course, I chose the following 4 novels: Alexander Solzhenitsyn's One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, about the horrible oppression leading to and following the Russian Revolution; Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, which depicts how the partition of Africa by European nations happened despite and in ignorance of already established groups and boundaries, customs, and religions. I chose Chaim Potuk's The Chosen, focusing on anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. And I chose Richard Wright's 1940 novel, Native Son, the story of Bigger Thomas, a young black man in his journey to the electric chair after accidentally smothering his white employer's daughter. As we studied these novels, we explored the history behind each, and my students were challenged to ask difficult questions and choose research topics to help them explore the answers to those questions. We discussed the oppressors and the oppressed, comparing what they had in common and what made them different in each setting. The students may have felt discomfort, but they did not have anyone telling them that they shouldn't feel discomfort at human suffering and mistreatment. Many felt empathy and outrage, and I'm sure many other emotions were experienced as well. Was one of those feelings guilt? I don't know, but producing feelings of guilt was never an approach I took. My lessons were backed up by the students' history and government teachers who also strove to help them understand what happened for good and for bad in the history of our nation and the government of this and other countries. If our students were sad and angry about what they were learning, we didn't see that as a bad outcome. If my own son had not felt discomfort at learning about these events in the history of our country and other countries, I would have been disappointed as a parent. I wanted students who were caring, empathetic, and enraged at injustices, whether in the past or in the present. And I assumed their parents would agree. I could have been naive. Before we began to read Native Son, I asked the students to focus on one passage and the author's preface. In this piece, which Richard Wright entitled, How Bigger Was Born, he compared the oppression in Russia and Germany to racism in the United States. Richard Wright wrote in the 30s and 40s. He lived with discrimination even after becoming a best-selling author. He eventually moved to Paris to get away from it all. His description of the forces that were instrumental in developing the psyche and behavior of his character, Bigger Thomas, long precede, but is a clear description of the definition that I gave earlier from Professor Hutchins. I'll quote from Wright's preface. There was still another level of Bigger's life that I felt bound to account for and render, a level as elusive to discuss as it was to grasp in writing. There seems to hover somewhere in the dark part of all of our lives, in some more than in others, an objectless, timeless, spaceless element of primal fear and dread, stemming perhaps from our birth. A fear and dread which exercises an impelling influence upon our lives, all out of proportion to its obscurity. And accompanying that first fear is, for want of a better name, a reflex urge toward ecstasy, complete submission, and trust. The springs of religion are here, and also the origins of rebellion. And in a boy like Bigger, young, unschooled, whose subjective life was clothed in the tattered rags of American culture, this primitive fear and ecstasy were naked, exposed, unprotected by religion or a framework of government or a scheme of society whose final faith would gain his love and trust, unprotected by trade or profession, faith or belief, open to every trivial blast of daily or hourly circumstance, unquote. So writing in the late 30s, Richard Wright explains the tenets of CRT perfectly. He felt that for a black youth growing up then in American society, there was no institution or aspect of society that he could turn to which would have his back. Not the law, not government, not education, not religion, not industry, and often, as depicted in this novel, not the family in which he grew up. Wright's conclusions portray the definition Hutchins gave when she wrote, "Race inflects all aspects of our society." When assigning and discussing novels like Wright's and countless other authors through time, and when teaching our nation's history, teachers are not teaching critical race theory, but what is presented and discussed very often reflects the definition of CRT as the material exposes the reality of life in this country. Because of the movement in our nation opposing the teaching of CRT, if teachers continue to teach social justice topics in our nation's schools, they could now open themselves and their school districts to opposition from parents and students, to disciplinary reactions that might affect the money given to the school district by their state legislatures, and even to legal or career-related trouble. When I taught high school, there was not a movement afoot to legislate away the topics that I and my colleagues were introducing to our students. Why? One answer, of course, could be that a lot of parents didn't know what the students were discussing and learning on a day-to-day basis. Right. There was more trust of teachers and less of a sense that the parents and communities should control the day-to-day activities in the classroom. I'm not saying that's always a good thing, but that is the way it was for me. The parents trusted teachers, and for the most part, we lived up to that trust. But it may have been that had they sat in on the lessons and discussions, they might not have agreed with what we were teaching. That didn't happen, of course. No one was using a cell phone to audio or videotape my lessons. I did not have to post lesson plans online. There was no online. Yeah. Parents and other community members did not, for the most part, feel empowered to object to school curriculum. And I repeat, that's not always a good thing. But I worry that the rich discussions of the complexities of our nation's history and racial tensions may now be abandoned because we're being more transparent in a time of great disagreement among citizens of this country. I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, what else will be thrown out as parents and students express their discomfort with what is being taught? Will the general public be able to decide the curriculum of each and every class on each and every day? No longer can we simply close our doors and teach. I was in Florida this past winter when Governor Ron DeSantis, along with members of his administration, banned textbooks that had been adopted by schools throughout Florida because they included the teaching of CRT. Notoriously, some of the texts were math books. That led to a lot of late-night TV jokes and head-scratching everywhere as people tried to understand what led to a math book being banned. So I dug further. I came up with the answer for one textbook. A practice of teaching for the past several decades has been that teachers must identify which state Common Core standard was being addressed in each daily lesson. Book publishers wanted to help the teachers with this work as they published books, so they looked at the commonalities among all of the states' standards, and then the ones that were most common, they tried to include in lessons in the textbooks, all textbooks, because teachers had to include Common Core standards in every subject they taught. Based on one widely used standard, the understanding of and appreciation for diversity in society, a table was used in a math lesson that gave the statistics divided by racial identity. The lesson was actually designed to teach graphs and tables. The purpose of the math lesson wasn't focused on the content of any of the tables that were used as examples. But while discussing that graph, teachers would also be touching on a selected Common Core standard addressing the understanding of diversity. And that was enough to get that math book thrown out of the Florida public schools. I read recently, as a compromise, the book companies are rewriting the books. So same book, but let's take this graft out of there. That governor made it his campaign in 2018 to eliminate Florida Common Core state standards. He issued an executive order in 2019 to do just that. And this year, in a bill he called notoriously the Stop Woke Act, and I'll quote here from the Sarasota Herald-Journal, he and his administration put restrictions on how race is discussed in schools, colleges, and workplaces, prohibiting instruction that could make students feel they bear personal responsibility for historic wrongs because of their race, color, sex, or national origin. In Virginia, Governor Glenn Youngkin didn't waste a day, signed an executive order in January on his first day in office banning the teaching of critical race theory, which he called political indoctrination. He has stated, it denies students the ability to think for themselves. Let's move further north. In Indiana, a House bill and a Senate bill in combination have been proposed requiring teachers to post a full year of lesson plans before the start of the school year. So parents have time for their students to potentially opt out of certain course material. That same bill also calls for everything that is taught in any course to be presented from only a neutral perspective. Imagine teaching slavery, Nazism, or any other such evil visited on human beings in our world with a neutral stance. In Michigan, Senate Bill 460 was introduced in May 2021. It would require that any curriculum used in any public school does not include coverage of the critical race theory. And they went on to define it. Here's how they defined it. I'll quote from the bill. Critical race theory refers to any Anti-American and racist theories, reading guides, lesson plans, activities, guided discussions, and other resources that promote that the United States is a fundamentally racist nation, that the United States Constitution is a fundamentally racist document, and that certain races are fundamentally oppressive or oppressed, unquote. Now, that bill has raised a lot of controversy, and it's still in committee, but be watching for it. Senate Bill 460. In all of these cases, legislators show their lack of understanding of CRT, and in most cases, their legislation actually suggests a new definition. They don't even match across the states. They display a need to control everything teachers may say, assign, or do in their classrooms or on field trips that address aspects of race in our country, and they display a fundamental distrust of the education system to teach our country's history fairly and truthfully. Or they do not want that material to be presented truthfully, because they do not want anything to be revealed in our country's history that suggests that racism or discrimination was or is in any way embedded in policy or practice. I believe that students should be introduced to all of history for good or for bad. They should read novels with characters who are the victims of oppression and learn about the oppressors. They should try to put themselves in the shoes of people different from themselves, even if it makes them uncomfortable. We do not need to tell our students how to think, but we need to get them thinking. We owe them the truth so they can formulate opinion based on reality. We owe them an accurate rendering of our nation's history, and we should expose them to the thoughts of authors and speakers who have something to say about that history, whether they do it through nonfiction or fiction. And while teaching should not be indoctrination, no teacher should have to take a neutral stance when teaching about slavery or other evils. I am no longer in the classroom, but I do not want to see the teachers who are in our country's classrooms face disciplinary measures up to and including losing their jobs just because they refused to teach the untruth, because they refused not to touch on issues of social justice, because they want their students to know what happened and care about what happened. We must be vigilant about not allowing local school districts and our state legislature to strip education of social justice topics. In the words of Jim Golden, a lecturer, author, and blogger, quote, "Privilege is having history rewritten so that you don't have to acknowledge uncomfortable facts. And racism is perpetuated by people who refuse to learn or acknowledge this reality. You have a choice," unquote. Well, we do have a choice. We need to speak up and let it be known that we support social justice education and the accurate teaching of the history of our nation when it comes to slavery, years of racial discrimination, and ongoing systemic racism, even when it reveals difficult truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. We've heard Jill's strong voice. Now let's hear yours. Let's join in our sending hymn, number 170. We are a gentle, angry people. We will sing verses 1, 2, and 4. I invite you to rise in body or spirit as you are willing and able to join us in singing again verses 1, 2, and 4. 170.
And
I want to again thank Jill for your passion and your wisdom, and Margie for beautiful music with us today. Thank you, and to all of you for being with us here in person or joining us from whatever device, wherever you are. As Jill challenges us to commit to discomfort in the classroom, I hope that we can take that challenge both here and wherever we might go from here, for those of us who no longer sit in classrooms on a regular basis. And so it is with that charge and that commitment that I send you with these words from the Reverend Rosemary Bray McNatt, from her essay, Our Faith, titled This Essential Work of Justice and Liberation for All. By no means are we perfect. We often fail as much as we succeed. Yet, even when we have broken our vows 1,000 times, we return to this essential work of justice and liberation for all. We do the work best when we remember what church is and what it is not. Church is not a place to hide. It is not the place to get away from the world. It is not a place where we get to pretend that the lives that we live and our particular situations are not terribly complex, often confusing, and sometimes depressing. Church is the place where we stand with one another, look the world in the eye, attempt to see clearly, and gather the strength to face whatever it is that we see with courage and, yes, with joy. May it be so by our work and by our togetherness. Thank you, and blessed be.